Welcome to Practice Disrupted, a podcast where we find ways to create new solutions to current challenges while elevating the value of architects. I'm your host, Evelyn Lee, an architect who spans tech as an angel investor, startup advisor, and founder of Practice of Architecture. Whether you're a seasoned architect or just starting in the field, this podcast is your gateway to think differently about the role architects play within our global community. Hello, Disruptors. Welcome to this week's episode of Practice Disrupted. Nyasha Harper-Michon is joining us today from her new home in Toronto, Canada, a recent transplant from Amsterdam, Netherlands. I have admired her from afar for a while now, following her on social media, and I am super excited to have her join us today. So here's a little background on Nyasha. Nyasha is a purpose-driven architect, built environment expert, business strategist, an inclusion and sustainability advocate who thrives at the intersection of cities, design, inclusion, sustainability, and technology. I feel that's like everything. Those are the big topics we all hit on all the time now. She's a self-proclaimed Archtivist, and we'll get into that a little bit more within the hour. But this is a term she coined for architecture and built environment professionals and enthusiasts driving environmental, social, and economic reform to foster positive changes in society and within the built environment sector. With experience in design and strategic development in international design studios, Nyasha is a sought-after speaker and most notably recently gave the keynote for the UIA World Congress of Architects in Copenhagen in 2023. Nyasha, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited to be
here. So we just did a little bit more of a formal bio, but we opened the episode with a little bit of an icebreaker. Is there anything else that you would like our guests to know about you that might be surprising or even inform the conversation we're about to have?
Well, I think, highly relevant is that I'm an early listener and super fan of the podcast. And I remember listening, but yeah, really, I remember listening to the first few episodes and I was like, whoa, this is so great to be able to sit in on conversations that I would love to have been a part of, or to hear things with people who I might not have, been able to cross paths with. And I had reached out to Janine at the time because I was just kind of moving into the space of business and marketing and business development within the field. And so I was like, how can I learn from people who are doing that, role models who know that side of the profession. And I also remember the last episode of the first season when y'all it was an opportunity to hear more about you both as the hosts and why you got into this. And I remember Janine teared up and she was really emotional. And it was a moment that was, I don't know, for me, it was really moving. And I remember it really well because it was encouraging to hear from other people who were so adamant about disrupting architecture practice. I kind of felt a bit alone, let's say, in some of the spaces, trying to battle with the rigid systems and misconceptions of the industry. And so it was just so exciting to be like, wow, there's people who are talking about this, who have been, for their entire careers have been in this space. And I think it was just really, for me, a moment that was also really important in my journey. So yeah, it's kind of, for me, it's super exciting to be here. And yeah, I think that the aspect of disrupting the profession and the industry is something that is so dear to me and yeah, I can really relate to.
I'm so sorry that Janine did not hear you get to say that live. And I wish this was one of those episodes she could have come back and join us for. So now I'm like, oh, maybe we should reschedule until Janine could be on. But we will plow ahead, but I will let her know. And those are there's such kind words just about the podcast. And just to reiterate what you're saying, for us, the podcast has been, and the community that's reached out to us because of it, has also, obviously made us feel a lot less alone in this space. So, yeah. Wow, that was an unexpected response to that first question. Thank you so much for that. let's switch the conversation back to you because you're our guest and, you're why I'm here today. So you coined the term Archtivist. I described it a little bit, but I'd love to hear you describe it in your own word. And actually, like, when did you first coin? I feel like that's been on your LinkedIn for as long as I've known you. So when did you first coin that word, and when did you see the need for more activists in the world?
Yeah. So I think Archtivism started, like officially, let's say it started in my thesis project, my master thesis. And I was, searching, it's those moments where you're searching for what you're interested in, who you are. And this is what kind of came out of it. But I think the inception like started way before that, of course. And for me, I think it started back when I was doing my undergrad in Paris in architecture. And I was really shocked by how traditional and modernist the education was. It was really like, we had to follow Le Corbusier's way of doing things and the style. And I was just very shocked by the fact that we should follow, someone from 100 years ago at the time. And so literally, because I think that what he was really important for was the fact that he came out with these radical ideas, and it was about changing, breaking free of the traditional ideas of ornament and all these things that he thought were frivolous. And it was about creating better and more functional places and spaces for the people, because it was very crowded in the cities at the time, etc. So it was, I think that's what we should take from him, rather than like taking, the 5 points of architecture too literally. But that's what I was kind of being taught at the time. So that dissonance, that wanting to shift from this kind of traditional way, was where it started to be, that Archtivism started. And another source of inspiration was art history. I loved that class. I was always super inspired by all these movements that were born in Paris, in the city that I was in, the city that I was born in as well. And it was always this friction between tradition and history, but also all things new and challenging the status quo. And so I kind of see it as Archtivism being born in that environment, a new movement of sorts that came to be in this context of the sort of traditional Parisian experience versus the new things, the global challenges that I was seeing, experiencing at the time and today still. And I really felt, we need something different. And so that's where this shift to Archtivism came from. And I always kind of go back to Le Corbusier and how he came up with towards an architecture. And I kind of think like now we need towards an Archtivism, something that's much more broad, much more inclusive. And architecture is a protected title, of course, and like it's a protected profession that's regulated, and with good reason. It's quite elitist and quite exclusive in a sense as well. And my idea with Archtivism was about broadening it to outside of people who don't necessarily hold this title, but who are very much a part of creating the built environment and the spaces, the communities, and the places that we need for us to be able to thrive. And so Archtivism is so much broader than architecture in that sense. It can go into community activism and advocacy groups, or policymakers to do with the built environment, or developers or architects, of course, working and designing within the space, but also those working on the profession and trying to create change in different ways, but all somewhat connected. So that's a bit, how it came to be. So it's quite broad, but I think it's something that we need as well in a time when, we feel a bit, things are kind of siloed, and we tend to work on things from different angles and in smaller groups. And I think that having something that where we can feel that we're all working on the same thing, but from different angles, with different backgrounds, with different perspectives, different expertise, I think can be quite empowering. And we're going to need that collaboration to tackle the issues that we're dealing with today.
I agree 100%. It's interesting, but also not unexpected that it kind of came out of your master thesis.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, how has that definition for you evolved personally, or where you see yourself within the big umbrella of kind of what you defined as Archtivists over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it definitely has evolved, but what I think is nice with it is that it's already quite inclusive in the sense that it doesn't limit anyone to just being an architect, for example, because that I know when I became a registered architect, I was struggling with the fact of not knowing if I wanted to be a traditional architect or do architecture in a traditional way. And so archtivism has evolved for me because it's been a way to do all the things I'm passionate about, to advocate and work towards, a just, inclusive, resilient built environment, but not necessarily in the traditional way that I thought I would, throughout school and in setting out to be an architect, but being able to do that in so many different ways. And so broadening, yeah, what an archivist can be. And I think with time, just meeting people and seeing all the different, stakeholders that there are within our industry that are so important to create, a space or a place or to empower a community, I realized that there's so many different ways of doing this. So it has expanded. Like I think at the time I thought, activism is this broad thing, okay, but I think it's become even more, yeah, broad and complex. So that's been quite exciting.
So I'm going to go off script because what I realize is, we obviously have your bio in the show notes, and you did recently moved, and you talk about being open to new adventures in your new home in Toronto. So I feel like our listeners are going to be asking, okay, then so what is she doing to be an archivist? Like, what spaces are you operating in now, and what are you doing that is enabling you to follow this passion, or what others might call what's your work today? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So it's been, yeah, a journey, like I said, like moving out of the traditional architecture practice space. And now I'm, yeah, looking to really get involved in nonprofits. And so working still within the built environment and within communities, but from a different angle. And I think that it's an exciting chapter for me because, yeah, I always thought I would be an architect, like kind of my whole life. That was the plan. You have these different paths that you're on, and you're like, this is what I need to do, and you take the different steps. And now it's completely different, and I'm seeing how I can bring that expertise. So knowing architecture, having designed, having worked with designers and worked from that perspective, and then using that in a different way to tackle some different issues that we're dealing with in the built environment. And for me, it's been a question of how to have more impact. And I felt that I could have impact in design. And I think that that's, yeah, we need great designers for sure. But personally, I felt that I could use, yeah, some of my communication skills, some of my strategy skills, my relationship building skills. That would be a better use in a way of my skill set to address the challenges that we have in the built environment and to create impact there. So that's the space that I'm working in now. And of course, how is in many different ways. I do, public speaking or workshops. I'll be doing some for Pride Month about, how to create inclusive and queer inclusive spaces and places, but also through teaching or through content creation. And yeah, using these different skills, working in different ways. But yeah, I think soon I'll have an announcement about exactly what I'll be doing, but for now it's not quite uh, finalized.
Well,
So
we might have to circle back after
yeah,
that's become a little bit more solidified. But I kind of appreciate all these different spaces that you're operating in because, there's so much change. Like, I think you see that there's so much change that needs to happen. And it's kind of hard to commit yourself to just one thing. Speaking is one thing, being a part of an organization is one thing, getting, sharing everything that you do on LinkedIn is another thing. And it's just different modes and medias to get the word out there, which is, and it's not dissimilar from like the portfolio careers that I hear a lot of individuals, at least in the tech side, talking about, how are the very, like, you've identified a passion. What are the multi modes that you can kind of utilize to make the greatest impact now that you
mhm.
know kind of firmly where you want to go with it?
Yeah, Exactly. Yeah, I think I've been very much influenced or inspired by the tech industry. My wife is in tech, and I think just seeing her career and all the things that she's like been working on has been, yeah, a big part also of my own journey, because I think there was a lot of contrast, let's say, with like the world old profession that I was in that, didn't seem quite to sync up with my, multicultural or millennial seeking mindset. And then there was this, new industry where things were moving super fast. They were harnessing new technologies, new ways of working. And I was just like, wow, there is this other world also where things are completely opposite. And I was living a bit vicariously through her work experiences. She was at a SaaS company, and just, yeah, how it was just so fast paced, the adaptive work models, the iterative products that they would do. I was really, really, really fascinated by it. And at the time, I mean, like, it was just booming completely, and companies are growing exponentially. Like, it's just so different, I think, than the architecture profession. But I feel like there's things to bring in from there. And I mean, I know that you think the same way, also having worked at Slack and having been in the thick of it all. But yeah, there's so much to borrow. And I feel that I like to say kind of head to the edges, to these parts where you're in between two professions. Like, I feel that that's where you can really learn the most. And that's where you can get the most, that's where innovation happens, actually. That's where the disruption can happen, when you're just on the border of two things and they come together in really new and innovative ways. And things that are normal in one sector, just brought into another sector, can completely just overthrow everything. So it also can just be borrowed ideas. It doesn't have to be in, like, quote unquote, so novel in a way, but the application in a new place is what makes it, yeah, what makes it really interesting. So yeah, I think I've always been super fascinated by the tech industry, and yeah, how that can influence our work, or architecture practice, I guess, also beyond the traditional things, or when people might talk about, I don't know, BIM or something. But I think also in how they do things, or how they think, how they're quick on their feet. I know that software is easier to change than hardware, like buildings. I guess, but I think there's still something to learn from there.
No, I mean, well, of course I agree with you 100% of like with everything that you just said. So one of the things that Janine and I struggled with looking at the history of the podcasts that we've recorded and trying to identify like where is the thing that we need to focus on? Like what is that one thing that we need to focus on within the industry to move it forward? Like it's a matrix, right? Like there's like I don't know if there's like one thing that's going to all of a sudden like spin us off in the right direction. There's a lot of actually pretty, I want to say there's a lot of little things, but I feel like there's actually a lot of pretty big things that we need to fix to move it forward. So I kind of want to pose that question to you now, where do you, because you mentioned at the top of the conversation, and I don't disagree with you about kind of the elitism and exclusivity when it comes to becoming an architect. And there's a whole nother conversation about the architecture we've created and the communities separately or inclusive of that conversation. But where do you think our profession, our industry needs the most change right now, or needs the most support?
Yeah, I think that's a huge question, right? I think I think one of the big things is how fragmented are, like, the building sector and the real estate sector and construction. Like, it's very fragmented and very siloed, and there's a lot of different players who don't necessarily understand each other or find it hard to work together, even though, I mean, that's what we in the end have to do. And I think that that's a big part of the struggle, just how broken up everything is and how siloed it is. And so even within the waves of change that we're seeing, sometimes they are also very siloed. So it's, thinking of equity or of social change and that being completely separate to environmental action or then completely separate to technology integration. Sometimes these things are still sort of seen as completely separate things. And we need a much more holistic approach to things. So we need to really collaborate together and start to see the value in one approach and how it helps another, etc. And that in the end, actually, they don't work if you don't tackle these different pillars. So yeah, that's quite a broad thing to say. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily tell you what to do specifically as an individual, but I think it's true that yeah, we need to start to see the connections between things and be translators sometimes between one thing and another, or one part of the sector, or one part of the value chain, or one innovative approach or angle. And then when we start making those connections, yeah, I think that then real, more sustainable and durable change can come about. So yeah, about coming together. And for me, that's kind of the idea with Archtivism, making it much more inclusive, much more broad, much more about the fact that we're all in this together and we're all actually working on these things just in different ways. And if we can see that we're working on the same problem and not on many different problems, I think that helps to come up with more integrated solutions, right?
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, right? Your use of collaboration and integrative solutions. I feel like we often believe that one of our skills is collaboration, right? We always talk about how we bring communities together, but then there's this odd gatekeeping that happens kind of with like on the non-community side of things that we do to ourselves that prevent us from moving things forward.
Yeah, I think we are a bit of an insular profession at times, which is a shame. I mean, and we, of course, are at service of the general public and society. So, but I think, yeah, I think it's the traditional role of an architect as, I think in at least in Western society, of this role of being this one person who's kind of all seeing and who says, this is how we're going to do this, and everyone else just kind of does whatever this one person has decided. And they might be brilliant, but there's still this kind of elitist or feel. And I think even with the Pritzker, we're still kind of with that idea of having this one figure or duo or trio or whatever. But even there, we celebrate, individuals in a sense, when we know that firms take collaboration, it takes full teams. And then beyond a firm, it takes full teams of various types of stakeholders to be able to create the buildings and the impact that's created. So I think there's still that aspect of ego and of, yeah, the architect as this sole one, person.
The star architect, right?
This, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. This architect kind of problem or issue, if you want to call it that way.
I feel like we could go and do another deep dive just on that alone. But I do want to kind of flip it to what then if we were to collaborate and come together, like what then, because the architecture community, the architecture profession, the architecture industry, in a way, is a microcosm of the things that we are creating and building and putting into communities and all the things that need to be fixed within communities as well. And you talk about sustainability and climate action, social equity. Is there one thing within that list that you think the architects have the greatest potential to affect sooner rather than later? I feel like we always say we want to affect all of it, but is there really an opportunity for us to be a strategic partner and a voice and move the needle on any of those one things in particular?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to tackle, and it's true that it can be hard to think of which one to tackle first, but maybe it's also just about different architects and different professionals tackling the issues in different ways, but all at the same time. I mean, I think one tangible thing that we can all do, which I think still can be in different ways, is to dismantle and challenge the idea of reference man being the center of all that we do. And I think that has a big, if we do that can really influence our environmental work, our social work, our, all of the work that we do. And so Reference Man, just to explain a bit who he is, he's, the standard or so-called standard that we use to design and to, as the reference for everything that we create. And he's 6 foot tall. He's a cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, upper middle class, white, neuronormative man. Like, really this supposed normal standard. And we've all been there. We've all used this figure, not necessarily called reference man, maybe modular man, Vitruvian man, whatever way that we've used it, but we've all used this as the sort of way to get started, to make something neutral, to make something for all, even though it's far from, because it really just disregards women, children, elderly, LGBTQ plus people, neurodivergent people, people with disabilities, people of color, and most men as well. So it's very exclusive. It doesn't represent anyone. And I think that when we design for this guy, or when we think about this guy, we are creating something that is just not going to be able to address the challenges that we face today. And it's not only in about accessibility, for wheelchair accessibility or something, or so it's more than just doing sort of a bit more than that, or thinking a little bit beyond reference man, because it's more about thinking how, or being more curious, opening your curiosity to how people really do use spaces. How do, just the fact that us women, you can't find public toilets when you're out, or that where park benches are in the city has an effect on elderly people being able to like go out and go to the market, for example. But if they need places to rest on their way there, they might just stay at home and be isolated and not go out if they don't have those places to go, or to sit down and take a rest on a hot summer day. It's small things, that you might not think about, that really affect how open a built environment is to everyone. And beyond that, it's our streets. It's the fact that reference man, goes to work. He has his 9 to 5. He drives a car, of course. So just that, the concept of shared streets, the way that we know that, gender disaggregated statistics show that men travel much more by car than women do, who tend to use other modes of transport, biking, walking, public transport, but that's not necessarily taken into consideration in our mobility plans. And then another aspect with reference men, which leads more to the environmental part, is the fact that reference man is a human being, and he's completely at odds with nature. This archetype is, when we design for him, a lot of the time we're also not designing for the other living beings. And so I think it's about going from people-centric to then life-centric, and thinking about the different critters, the different plants, the animals that also inhabit the world and that are an important part of our ecosystems and of our cities, etc. And so ditching reference man is also thinking about them. So it's kind of, I think it's maybe a tangible way of getting started, because I think as a designer, if you think about, two or even just one non-reference man kind of identity, and, two native plants or two native animals that you really focus on for a specific project, I think that you can come up with something that's really interesting, and that many other users will also find their way and will be able to use in different ways. So starting there by getting rid of that notion of that being somehow neutral or a better way or the standard way of getting started with things, I think would help a lot in terms of what types of outcomes we can and design and it will get a diverse and eclectic kind of city that starts to emerge if each designer takes on these different non-reference men identities. So Yeah, I think that's a tangible way to kind of get started with these huge
No,
topics.
and it's interesting because I feel like I'm sure that's been top of mind for you this week because I feel like I just read recently on your LinkedIn posts kind of you were touching on reference man too. So
Yeah.
I appreciate, and we'll make sure to link out to that specific post too in the show notes. It's so easy to get really in like supportive and behind you for your enthusiastic voice on all of the topics that we've been covering. But I kind of want to go a little bit back to your history and what made you question all of this as a young architect in your master's thesis in Paris. Is it, what do you think about how you were raised or the cities that you have lived in over time has really driven your own personal perspective on all of these broader issues?
Yeah. I think that's it's always nice to kind of dive deeper into your background and why you think the way that you think, right? Well, I have quite a bit of a nomadic childhood. I lived in different cities in Paris. I was born in Paris, and my parents are from Trinidad and Tobago, and I lived briefly in Trinidad when I was really small. And we moved to Brussels, we moved to the States, and then I went back to Paris for university, and then moved to Amsterdam, and now I'm in Toronto. So it's been a lot of movement. And I think
Absolutely.
that, yeah, I think that it's had a profound, of course, impact on the way that I see things and my experience of architecture and my experience of the world around me. And ultimately, I think it's the notion of not seeing, one ultimate standard, because I've been a part of so many different cultures. I'm also bilingual. I speak French and English, and my parents were in languages. My mother was an interpreter translator, and my dad a professor for languages. So even that, like knowing that one thing in one language can be said in one way, and then in another language can be said in a completely different way, or that notions in one language don't even exist in another. I think you kind of start to understand diversity and the fact that things are complex, and that they are due to where you're from or your experience. It creates a sense of empathy as well, because you understand that you are the way you are thanks to your background, and that other people are too, and so their convictions, their way of seeing things is a product of that, and that makes sense to me. And so then I feel like I'm much more empathetic also to things that I might not agree with, but I kind of understand it based on the context. So I think that way of understanding that there is no one right way, or there is no one standard, because every place I've lived in has done some of the same things in completely different ways, and in each of those places say, no, this is what's normal. I'd be like, well, I mean, I know lots of places where they do something completely different and it's normal for them too. So just knowing that, I think that link with reference man, kind of realizing that it really doesn't make sense to have this supposed standard or this thing that is supposed to be, that is just singular, and that can be used for everything. I think, there was a clear dissonance there that I might not have been able to voice in that way at the time. But I think that cultural awareness, that adaptability, that empathy, that problem solving of dealing with different cultures and different ways of interacting and communicating has led to much more a certain openness and curiosity as well to the different ways of doing things. And I think it's so enriching. And I try to bring that kind of global view or that way of having been brought up to sometimes things that are much more local, and vice versa, and try to learn from what's super local. Because for some things, I haven't had that experience of living, 20, 30 years in one place and knowing that one place so well in that specific way. For me, it's a different mix that I bring. So I try to balance those and learn from different experiences. And I think that that's really influenced my way of seeing things and of practicing archtivism as well.
Yeah. So my next question is, and it might be a relatively easy one, is, when did your love for architecture kind of get overlaid on top of that? And why, out of all the degrees out there, given your background, did you pursue architecture? Because I feel like there's so many different ways to impact all of the systems that you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that I knew that I wanted to do all the things that I'm interested in now before, or I may have known deep down, but it wasn't something that that I knew that well in a way, or consciously, let's put it that way. And I think maybe that's a bit in this idea of, when you ask kids, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think that we probably should stop asking kids that, because, what do you want to be is really like, I want to be an architect. And that's what it was for me. In the end, it's like choosing this one profession as opposed to choosing what sort of impact you want to have, or what sort of action do you want to do in the world? Like what impact do you want to have? I think is nicer and much more broad, but can also lead then to you picking different ways of getting there. And in a way, for me, I guess architecture at the beginning was the end. And I think it should be a means to an end, not the end, not like I should just be an architect. But it was because when I was younger, my sister and I, we made this little like play town in our playroom, and we would be really resourceful getting things from like milk cartons and cereal boxes and cutting up things and making little homes. I mean, it was a full city functioning with a school, a train, there was public transport. I mean, it was really like very, very intense. And so my mom was like, hey, this is architecture. You might want to look into it. And she signed me up for a course at the local architecture institute in Brussels. And the thing to do, like the thing for the course over that summer was like 1 week or so, was to use cereal boxes and milk cartons and make homes. And I was like, oh, so
and build what you already built. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay, well then, yeah, I want to be an architect. And so that was kind of the beginning of, I think I must have been 10 or 11. And from then on, I was like, I want to be an architect. And yeah, that was everything I wanted to do. So everything I did from there, the courses I took in high school, the schools I applied to, it was just, that was the goal. And it was a very clear path. And it was only when I actually became an architect
yes.
that then
That's the next question, right? When throughout that career path, was it clear to you that traditional practice was not the way? And, I think the big question that I always get is, how do you create kind of a career that you've created in a space that most architects don't understand outside of our traditional roles?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because once you're in it, and in architecture school, I mean, it's very clear what the path is. I mean, you're going to be an architect. Depending on the country you're in, you'll have to go through different tests or different processes to be able to be licensed or registered within that country or state or province, however it works locally for you. And that usually in school, the goal is that, you want to start your own firm, because going back to that Starchitect idea, it's very much like, to be successful in architecture, you have your own firm, you design your own buildings. And that is the goal for, I think, a lot of people. And that's how, at least I was taught, that was what was shown as was the thing that you should be aiming for. And it's a bit strange because, first of all, the majority of people won't own their own practice. And even lots of people who study architecture may not even design in that way of being sort of the conceptual designer. There's so many different parts of designing and making sure a building is detailed all the way that it can actually function, beyond a concept. So it's a bit strange that we really focus on this one aspect, which is important, but there's also a myriad of other things that are just as important to get, good buildings off of paper and into reality.
When did you come to your own realization that path was not right for you? And I think the harder thing is then like, what was the path that you took and the steps that you took to get to where you are and kind of creating your own space?
So there's so many different parts of the profession. But while I was studying, I think my undergrad, because there was really this dissonance and because it was very traditional, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't study anymore. I had to take a break, and I actually went and worked at an architecture firm. And working in the reality of the profession, I realized, oh, okay, I actually do like this what we're doing. I liked being on site. I liked solving problems. I worked on some renovation projects where, you were being called on site. You had to run over there and it'd be like, we just knocked this down. This is what's happening. What should we do? It was so exciting. And I realized, like, whoa, okay, so there is a place for me in this. And then I did a master's where I worked and studied. So it was a specific master's where I was really adamant about not going back to school full time, because I didn't love just being so much in the theoretical space. I really liked the tangible aspects of the work that we do. And so that was also super important, because I was able to develop my own ideas about architecture and what type of architect I wanted to be, while practicing and being in contact with architects who were creating things, being a part of creating actual buildings that would be built. And I think that was a really important part of my journey. And so then in doing that, I started realizing that I was much more interested in the impact and on the issues that we had to tackle, more than some of the technical aspects of the profession. And there was a lot of focus on that, and needing to, have worked a certain number of years, before you could get certain opportunities within practice. And I was somewhat impatient. I was like, no, I want to get into those things now. And so I moved into business development and marketing and communications within the architecture profession, because I felt that I would be able to get closer to working with the different stakeholders at the beginning of projects, and to be able to influence what was in the brief, what was intended from the beginning. Because I had realized, as a designer, sometimes we would get briefs, we would get things that we had to solve, but they were already somewhat flawed to begin with. And there was a lot of kind of complaining about it. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be good to be able to influence it before, it comes down to the designer to actually get started on it? And so that's why I got into that space. And I think with time, I realized, yeah, I'm not going to be designing anymore. I'll be designing the briefs or the connections or the practice, much more than actually the buildings themselves. And it was a hard shift, to be honest, a lot of loss of identity, because I was an architect, and the profession is not so inclusive to non-designing architects. I think you must relate to that. So yeah, it was a bit hard at the beginning, but I think that once I was able to just, let go, I guess, of a part of my identity, or of an initial plan that I'd had for myself, and realize that there were other things out there, it was then exciting. And I think using LinkedIn and voicing that, and voicing my opinions about things, and seeing that I could have really great conversations and meet like-minded people, listening to podcasts, going to events, I started to realize that there was a lot more than what I had initially thought architecture could be. And I think that was important too, to get community, and to not feel alone in the struggle of what's one's identity, and to be authentic, to be your authentic self, and feel that it might not be what you're supposed to be doing, or whatnot. So community, I think, was online or in real, like both, I think, were helpful in that process, for sure.
At the top, before we started hitting record, we talked a little bit about how you're relatively new to motherhood too, with two 15-month-old twins at home. Mm-hmm. How has motherhood changed your lens on everything that you're doing now?
Yeah, it's one of those profound changes that right up to the moment before they're born, you're like, yeah, I don't know if it's really going to change me. And then it really does. I mean, for the better. But I think, for one, I definitely feel a sense of wanting to contribute to a better future for them. I mean, I think it becomes really personal. I mean, I've always been about this, but I think that having children, you really see it, that I don't want to leave want to do everything that I can to make sure that I am, creating a better place for them, or not creating a worse place, at least, for them in the future. So I think that's one. But also, maybe a small anecdote that I think was really eye-opening was that, so the kids were having trouble sleeping. I mean, it was crazy, waking up, I don't know how many times in the night. They were up till about 8 months. And it was just, we were so tired, we're getting bottles, we're changing diapers at night, rocking babies, everything multiple times in the night. But it was a little much. And of course there's twins. So it was really crazy nights. And we were like, we need to get them to sleep through the night. Like, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we need to do it. And basically we did sleep training. And so we would let them cry, 3 minutes, then you go in and, don't cry, don't pick them up, but you're just, comforting them, then 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I was reading about it. People were like, my kids are now sleeping. I was like, how is this possible? Because I'm going from horrible nights to really them sleeping throughout the night. Like, I didn't really believe it, but I thought we'd try. And they cried a lot the first 2 nights. And my wife and I, we were both crying as well, because it was really horrible to just hear them crying like that. But after 2 nights, they slept through the night entirely. And I think it was impressive to see how we also played such a big role in what they were doing at night. So we were reinforcing the waking up, and because through our actions of picking them up, of feeding them, of doing so many things when they didn't necessarily need it, that's the pattern that we gave them. And I think it was really a big lesson in realizing that sometimes things that you think are external to you and are, out of your control, that actually you are also a part of making those things happen. And you might not realize it, but you are also facilitating that, whatever it is that is something that you're struggling with. And so I think it made me realize that, wow, like, you can have so much power sometimes when you feel that you might not have any power at all, and that, they can't sleep through the night. It has nothing to do with me. But then I realized that actually we did have a big part. We played such a big role in them not sleeping through the night, even though you don't think so. So I think it's a nice lesson just in general to realize that sometimes really when we think things are out of our control, they're not necessarily, and we can be very much active parts of some of the challenges that we face. And I think in the built environment, it's the same. And as architects, we can be very much a part of the issues that we see. And we can say, well, I'm an architect, I'm not commissioning the project, or I'm not doing this, so I don't have that agency, perhaps, to be able to make that change. But I think it's also about flipping the way that you see things and realizing that you do have power. I mean, you might not have all the power in the world, but I think if you change your mindset, you change your way of dealing with the same problem, you can realize that you have a lot more agency and power than you might think.
Hi, Disruptors. Thank you for joining us today on an episode of Practice Disrupted. If you like the content for today's show, you can find all of our past episodes over on practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. Be a part of the conversation by joining me, our speakers, and other disruptors in our community at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Our social media handle is Practice of Arch. That's Practice of ARCH. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to drop us a DM and say hello. Tune in next week for a new conversation on change in the profession.